Learn English through story. Sins of the Heart. In a quiet, unassuming town nestled at the edge of a sprawling forest, there lived a man named Samuel. Samuel was known for his discipline, his unyielding work ethic, and his dedication to his family and community. For many years, he managed the only factory in town, providing a livelihood for nearly every household. To most, he was a pillar of virtue, a man who could do no wrong. But beneath his polished exterior lay hidden flaws, deeply rooted and scarcely acknowledged flaws, that would come to test the strength of his character in ways he never imagined. Samuel's pride was his strongest companion, though he had never thought of it as a fault. Pride was his shield, protecting him from the vulnerabilities he associated with failure and weakness. This pride fostered a sense of invincibility and entitlement, and as time wore on, Samuel grew increasingly convinced of his own moral superiority. He often viewed himself as the silent savior of the town, believing that without him, it would crumble. This quiet, insidious pride led him to think he was beyond reproach, a notion that no one dared to challenge. His pride grew unchecked, entwined with his identity until he could no longer separate the two. Though he was admired, Samuel rarely showed genuine warmth. His heart was guarded, encased in a wall of ambition and self-preservation. The people who worked for him saw him as a figure of authority, but not of kindness. He was efficient and pragmatic, often more concerned with productivity than with the personal well-being of his employees. Many nights, he would stay awake, calculating ways to increase profits, streamline processes, and outsmart potential competition. In his eyes, compassion was a weakness that could jeopardize his hard-won success. As the years went by, Samuel's pride deepened into hubris, and his sense of entitlement began to taint his judgment. He started to dismiss the opinions of others, including his close friends and family. His wife, Eleanor, had long grown weary of his aloofness, but she remained loyal out of love and duty. She had witnessed Samuel's transformation from an eager, earnest man into a distant, arrogant figure who was almost unrecognizable. She often pleaded with him to spend more time with their two children, who were growing up with a father who seemed more like a shadow than a present force. Samuel, however, dismissed her concerns as trivial, and instead threw himself further into his work. One evening, Samuel received word of a competitor who was opening a new factory in a nearby town. He saw this as a direct threat and immediately began to devise ways to undermine his rival. He had heard rumors that his competitor was struggling financially, so Samuel arranged for his company to spread unfavorable gossip, tarnishing the reputation of the new factory before it even opened. His strategy was coldly effective. The competitor's factory faltered, and Samuel's company maintained its dominance. To him, this was a victory, another affirmation of his ability to outwit anyone who dared challenge his empire. However, that victory came with a price. In the months following, Samuel's actions began to haunt him in unexpected ways. He experienced strange dreams filled with shadows and whispers, voices that accused him of betrayal and greed. He would awaken in the dead of night, heart pounding, unable to shake the lingering feeling of guilt. But even then, he refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. He justified his actions as necessary, a means to protect his legacy and his family's future. This self-justification silenced his conscience, at least for a time. Meanwhile, his relationship with Eleanor continued to deteriorate. She was no longer the cheerful woman he had married, her face now lined with sadness and weariness. She missed the warmth they once shared, but every attempt to reach out to Samuel was met with cold indifference or irritation. He would brush her off, claiming that his work was too demanding, that she simply didn't understand the pressures he faced. In truth, Samuel was growing increasingly resentful of Eleanor, viewing her as a reminder of his own moral shortcomings. Rather than confronting his guilt, he pushed her further away. As time passed, Samuel's sins began to fester, like poison seeping into his very being. His pride became arrogance, his ambition turned into greed, and his determination soured into ruthlessness. He could sense a growing darkness within himself, but he refused to confront it, fearing that acknowledging his flaws would mean admitting weakness. Instead, he continued to bury his conscience under layers of justifications and excuses. One day, Samuel was approached by an old friend, a man named Robert, who had known him since childhood. Robert had fallen on hard times and was desperate for work. He came to Samuel, hoping to secure a position at the factory, where he could earn enough to support his family. Samuel, however, turned him away coldly, claiming that the factory had no openings. In reality, he viewed Robert as a reminder of his own humble beginnings, a past he had long since abandoned. Seeing Robert struggle only served to reinforce Samuel's sense of superiority, and he took a twisted satisfaction in watching his old friend walk away defeated. That night, Samuel's dreams grew darker. He saw visions of Robert wandering the streets, hungry and destitute, his face hollow with despair. In his dream, Samuel reached out to help him, but Robert's eyes were filled with accusation, his gaze piercing through Samuel's facade. When he awoke, Samuel could still feel the weight of that gaze, and for a moment, he was overcome with shame, but he quickly dismissed it, telling himself that Robert's misfortune was not his responsibility. Yet the sins of the heart are not easily buried. Samuel's greed and pride had begun to alienate those around him, and whispers of his actions started to spread through the town. People began to view him with suspicion and resentment, their admiration turning to contempt. Even his employees, who had once respected him, grew disillusioned. They saw him as a tyrant, a man who cared only for his own wealth and power. Samuel, however, remained oblivious, too wrapped up in his own sense of righteousness to notice the shifting tides. Then, one winter evening, tragedy struck. A fire broke out in the factory, tearing through the building with a ferocity that left nothing but ashes in its wake. The fire destroyed everything Samuel had built, leaving him with nothing but the charred remnants of his empire. As he stood before the ruins, his heart heavy with despair, he was forced to confront the reality he had long ignored. His pride, his greed, and his ruthlessness had led him to this moment, a moment of reckoning he could no longer escape. In the aftermath of the fire, Samuel's life unraveled. The townspeople who once revered him now looked upon him with scorn. They whispered of his sins, of the people he had wronged, of the darkness that had consumed him. His family too suffered. Eleanor, who had endured years of neglect, finally reached her breaking point. She left him, taking their children with her, leaving Samuel alone to face the consequences of his actions. For the first time in his life, Samuel was forced to confront the emptiness within himself. He saw his pride for what it truly was, a hollow, destructive force that had driven away everyone he loved. He realized that his ambition, which he had once viewed as a virtue, had been a mask for his own insecurities and fears. And in that moment of clarity, he understood the true nature of his sins, the sins of the heart that had led him to ruin. With nothing left to lose, Samuel sought redemption. He began to reach out to the people he had wronged, offering apologies and seeking forgiveness. He helped rebuild the town, dedicating himself to the community he had once viewed as beneath him. Over time, his humility and sincerity won back the respect of the townspeople, though the scars of his past mistakes would never fully heal. In the end, Samuel learned that true strength lies not in pride or ambition, but in humility and compassion. He understood that the sins of the heart, pride, greed, and selfishness, are the most dangerous, for they can blind a person to their own humanity. And though he could never undo the harm he had caused, he found solace in the knowledge that he had finally faced the darkness within himself and emerged on the other side, a wiser and humbler man. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoy, then please like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel.